Hi there, this is the second video associated with the MVC tutorial step, developing an MVC component and adding custom fields. And in this step, I want to look in particular at this code, which is associated with outputting the fields on our Hello World record. Now, if you look at some of the code in this view, this is our site views hello world view.html.php. You can see it's got reference to JEvent Dispatcher and JPlugin Helper, and those are the classes, the core Joomla classes, which are associated with plugins. Now, you're probably familiar with plugins, but just in case you're not, we have different types of extensions in Joomla. We've obviously got our component, which we've been developing over the past series of steps. These are modules which appear on various pages in and around the place, to the side, up or down the bottom. Then we've got the template, which kind of pulls it all together and does the presentation aspect. And in behind, we've got plugins. When plugins work on a publish subscribe sort of basis, so they request access to the content under various circumstances. And whenever an event of a certain type is raised, it's passed to the publishing or the plugins which have subscribed to that event, and then they can change things and pass things back. And really the custom fields works on that basis, and in particular the plugin that is the key plugin there is in the system category, and it's in fields, and it's fields.php. So this is the kind of like the key plugin for the custom fields functionality. And I've drawn a picture of how it all works here. So to get plugins triggered, there are actually 3 steps. So the first step is where we load data in from the database. And what Joomla does is it goes to the database and it goes to the extensions table, and I'll have to find all here. And it picks off out of the extension tables details of all the plugins. So it will select these extensions where the type is plugin, and if we go down we see a lot of them here, and it will include the name of the plugin. It will include the folder as well as the ID and the params. So it will include those 4 things, and the folder that it is really equates to the plugin type. So you can see here it has the type, which is associated with the folder, the name of the plugin, and the params and the ID. And if we look at the plugins directory on Joomla, these are all the types that are on my system here. And in particular, we've got one which we've been looking at, which is the system type. And that equates to the folder here. So this is the first step, is when the plugin helper actually loads in all of these plugins from the database. But that's all, it just sits there. They sit there in a table within that plugin helper class. And that happens really at the start of Joomla, and so we don't need to do anything about it. Now the second step occurs when we have a bit of code which calls import plugin and passes the type of plugin that it wants to get imported. So if we look at our code, we have got a call JPlugin helper import plugin, and we've asked it to import the plugin type of content. and that is going to result in these content plugins being included. And the reason we've added this is really because in general we're dealing with content here. In fact, the system plugin that we have for the fields is going to be already loaded because system plugins are loaded at the very start. But if we get back to the import plugin functionality, what it will do is it will read from this table here all of the plugins which have the type matching the parameter passed in. So for example, all the plugins which have the type of content. And plugins have a very strict naming convention. If you've ever tried to develop one of your own, you've probably hit against the naming convention and had some problems with it. But the reason is that from the name and the type, it can actually work out where it is on the file system. And it will then look for that particular file. Sorry, if we go back to this. Which will be the plugin, main plugin code. So for example, in our fields code, it will be under plugins system fields fields.php. So this is the file which contains the class definition for that. And the require once will get PHP to really process that file. So basically PHP processes this file, and really all there is in it is a class definition. So it just makes PHP aware of this class here and the methods that it supports. The second thing it does then is it calls new. So it's actually creating an instance of that particular plugin class, and it's passing a dispatcher object to it. And this dispatcher is the other class that is associated with handling the plugins. And there is a kind of like a single dispatcher instance, which it gets from getInstance in the same way as on our code we call dispatcher getInstance. So here the plugin helper will get the dispatcher instance and pass that dispatcher instance as a parameter to the new, which means that it will be a parameter to the plugin constructor. And if we look at our code here, we see that here's our fields, system fields. It extends JPlugin. And JPlugin maps really now to CMS plugin, which extends event. And if we look at the event constructor here, it's taking the dispatcher that we passed in and it's calling the attach method of that dispatcher, and it's passing itself as the parameter. So what is going to happen in our code here is that the plugin constructor is going to call attach within the dispatcher, and it's going to pass itself that instance as a parameter. And the dispatcher then is going to do a couple of things. First thing it's going to do is store the plugin. So this is just an array of plugins. It will store an instance of that plugin, so kind of like a pointer back to the plugin instance there. Then it will call the class methods of the plugin. So if we just go actually down in our dispatcher code to attach, here it's calling get class methods, and this is a PHP function which is going to go through the plugin, for example our system plugin, and it's going to pick off all of the functions. It's going to find all the functions and return those. And the dispatcher is then going to store those methods, and this is kind of like an associative array where the key is the method and the value then is an array of the plugins which support that method or which have that method. So for example, our System Fields plugin has got a function called onContentPrepare. So the dispatcher will see that as one of the methods in the plugin, and it will go through its methods array here. It will find any entry here which is keyed on content prepare, and if there's an entry there, it will add into the value there an extra item in that array which will be pointing to the new plugin. If it doesn't find an onContentPrepare method in this array, it will create a new entry and then put an array with just a single element pointing to this method. So this really sets us up for the third stage, which is trigger. And here we use our dispatcher instance and we call trigger, and we pass onContentPrepare first and then onContent after title and so on. And what this will do is it will come into our dispatcher instance and it will call a trigger method, and the trigger method will read this array here, and it will look for an entry in this array which has got a method which matches the method that's been passed in. So in this case, it will look for a method which is called onContentPrepare, and then it will find all the plugins which have that method, and then for each of those plugins it will call that method on that plugin instance. And those plugins will do two things. First of all, they can return a value, and the dispatcher collates all the returned values in an array and then passes it back. So this is where we've got results as an array from all of the plugins which support this method, and then we do an implode to get that into a string. And the second thing that a plugin can do is it can change some of the variables. So in our code, when we're passing onContentPrepare, we're passing our item by reference with that ampersand there, and this enables our system plugin, our System Fields plugin, to add in all the JC fields fields into that item so that we have those available as well. And if you go to this page, you can see the various plugins that are available. Just go back, sorry, here to this page. It lists all of the types of events, and there's our onContentPrepare, and the parameters that you pass will be dependent upon the event that is being raised here. So different events will have different parameters. So that's basically it. The results, then we just store them in properties and then we output them in the layout file. I've had a look at Joomla 4 and it works on a similar basis, except here, rather than it being an array of plugins, we've got a list of plugins, and you can have priorities associated with those plugins. The only other thing I meant to say was, well, why do we have all these different types of plugins? And I think it's really because Joomla doesn't want to process all of these plugins for every HTTP request. It really just wants to process the plugins that are necessary. So that's why whenever we're going to be using a plugin, we tell Joomla to import that the plugins of that type first, and then we're sure that they're going to be available before we trigger the event. Okay, that's about it for this video. Hopefully you find that interesting, and thanks very much for watching. Bye.